it wasn't so much how they dressed as their demeanour, how they talked to each other, the way they sat, the jokes they made. That isn't a coincidence. The critic Harold Bloom argued that we recognise ourselves in Shakespeare not just because he captured something eternal in human nature, but because he wrought our very idea of what a person is, an introspective, self-fashioning individual. Similarly, the Beatles were crucial to the creation of a post-1960s personality, curious, tolerant, self-ironising, unaffected, both feminine and masculine. Timothy Leary declared, "The Beatles are mutants, prototypes of evolutionary agents sent by God, endowed with a mysterious power to create a new human species." The microculture of the Beatles, which had such a decisive impact on our culture, germinated in the many hours that John and Paul spent in Paul's front parlour or in John's bedroom, guitars on laps, making songs, poetry, and laughter. This is a book about how two young men merged their souls and multiplied their talents to create one of the greatest bodies of music in history. The partnership of Lennon and McCartney was responsible for 159 of the Beatles' 184 recorded songs, and they were the dominant creative decision-makers within the group. "There is no doubt in my mind that the main talent of that whole era came from Paul and John," said George Martin. "George, Ringo, and myself were subsidiary talents." This is also a love story. John and Paul were more than just friends or collaborators in the sense we normally understand those terms. Their friendship was a romance, passionate, tender, and tempestuous, full of longing, riven by jealousy. This volatile, conflicted, madly creative quasi-marriage escapes our neatly drawn categories, and so has been deeply misunderstood. We think we know John and Paul, we really don't. A popular narrative about the group and its central partnership emerged in the wake of the Beatles' demise in 1970. It was drafted by John Lennon in a series of dazzlingly articulate interviews and fleshed out by a generation of rock critics who idolised him. In the 1970s, John was the hero the world wanted, ostentatiously anti-establishment, charismatically tormented, a figure who matched not just the moment but also much older ideas of genius. Paul was deemed a straight, a bourgeois poser with no substance. A dualism took hold that has persisted ever since, with John presented as the creative soul of the Beatles and Paul as his talented but facile sidekick. After Lennon's untimely end in 1980, this narrative became canonical. Somehow, it survives, albeit in a moth-eaten form, even though it says more about the cultural and political preoccupations of a bygone era than about what actually happened. John versus Paul is still the polarising shorthand by which fans and writers discuss the Beatles. But as the protagonists themselves often acknowledged, there was no John without Paul, and vice versa. Their collaboration, even at its most competitive, was a duet, not a duel. The standard narrative has distorted the true personalities of Lennon and McCartney and impoverished our understanding of the Beatles' music. We need a new story, not least because recent years have seen the emergence of important sources of evidence that definitively undermine the old one. Releases from the Beatles' record label have included hours of demos, outtakes, and studio chatter which throw new light on the band's relationships and creative processes. Peter Jackson's documentary Get Back, for which he updated the extensive footage of the band shot in 1969 for Michael Lindsay Hogg's documentary Let It Be, proved revelatory. These new primary sources give us access to the band as it actually was, rather than as subsequently reconstructed by critics and biographers, or by its members whose memories, like everyone else's, are flawed and biased. This book tells the story of John and Paul's friendship, from when they meet until John's death. It does so by way of the richest primary source of all, their songs. Each chapter is anchored in a song that tells us something about the state of their relationship at the time. either.
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description.